Dwight D. Eisenhower would later be remembered as the calm face of victory, the supreme Allied commander, the man who oversaw the largest amphibious invasion in history. But in the days before D-Day, Eisenhower was haunted by a single fear, one that had nothing to do with German tanks, Atlantic storms, or even Adolf Hitler. He feared failure, not the kind written in reports or debated by historians, but the kind that leaves tens of thousands of young men dead on foreign beaches, with no justification powerful enough to bring them back. By early June 1944, Operation Overlord was ready. On paper, it was flawless. Thousands of ships, thousands of aircraft, 5 assault beaches, an army unlike anything the world had ever seen. Every detail had been rehearsed, revised, and recalculated. And yet Eisenhower knew something no plan could erase. If this went wrong, it would go wrong on a scale history could not forgive. The invasion depended on a fragile chain of assumptions: that the weather would hold, that German defenses had been weakened by bombing, that deception operations had convinced Hitler the attack would come at Pas-de-Calais, that airborne troops would land where they were supposed to, that the first waves would not collapse under fire. Any break in that chain could turn the English Channel into a mass grave. In the early hours of June 4th, the weather turned against them. High winds, rough seas, low clouds, conditions that made airborne drops dangerous and amphibious landings nearly suicidal. Eisenhower faced a decision no commander wants: delay and risk losing surprise, or proceed and risk catastrophe. He postponed the invasion by 24 hours. It was a gamble. Inside his headquarters, tension thickened. Meteorologists argued over forecasts. Naval commanders warned of landing craft swamping in heavy seas. Air commanders worried about pilots flying blind through cloud cover. Every voice carried weight, and every recommendation pointed toward danger. Eisenhower listened to them all. Then he made the call. The invasion would go forward on June 6th. Outwardly, he appeared composed. He visited troops. He spoke calmly. He projected confidence because confidence was required. But privately, Eisenhower prepared for the worst. In his pocket, he carried a short handwritten note. It was not a speech. It was not a message of victory. It was an admission of responsibility. It read, in part, that if the landings failed, the blame was his alone. Not the planners, not the generals, not the men who would die on the beaches. Him. This was Eisenhower's true fear. Not that the Germans would stop the invasion, but that history would remember him as the man who ordered it anyway. As the night of June 5th gave way to dawn, thousands of paratroopers boarded aircraft in the dark. Their faces were blackened. Their equipment weighed them down. Many would land miles from their drop zones. Some would never land at all. Eisenhower watched them go. He knew that once the first plane crossed the French coast, the decision could not be undone. There would be no recall, no correction, no second chance. The greatest operation of the war was no longer a plan. It was motion, and Eisenhower understood something few commanders ever admit, that at this scale, leadership is not about certainty. It is about accepting that you may be wrong and giving the order anyway. Dawn broke over Normandy under a low gray sky. The sea was rough, the air thick with smoke and uncertainty. As landing craft lurched forward, many soldiers were already seasick, praying or staring silently at the metal ramp in front of them. Some would later say they felt something worse than fear, a sense that events had already escaped human control. At Omaha Beach, that feeling became reality. The German defenses there were far stronger than Allied intelligence had predicted. Bombing runs had missed their targets. Concrete bunkers remained intact. Machine guns were positioned to rake the beach end to end. When the ramps dropped, entire units were cut down before they could take a single step forward. Reports coming in during the early hours were alarming. Casualties were far higher than expected. Units were pinned down. Communications failed. For a moment, a very real moment, it appeared that Omaha might collapse entirely. Eisenhower did not see the beaches. He saw maps. He saw markers moving, or not moving, across boards inside his headquarters. Each delay represented lives being lost somewhere beyond the channel. The option existed to pull back. Some commanders quietly considered it. Reinforcements could be halted, the beach abandoned, the invasion salvaged elsewhere. But Eisenhower refused. If Omaha failed, the entire invasion risked unraveling. The beaches were linked. The timetable was unforgiving. A retreat would expose landing craft, strand airborne troops, and hand the initiative back to the Germans. The cost of stopping now would be greater than the cost of continuing, so the order remained unchanged. More men were sent forward. On the beach, small groups of soldiers began doing what no plan had predicted. They moved not as units, but as individuals. A handful crawled toward a seawall. Others followed shell craters for cover. Junior officers and sergeants took command where senior leaders had fallen. Slowly, almost invisibly, gaps began to appear in the German defenses. By midday, the situation had stabilized. By afternoon, Allied forces were pushing inland. The invasion had survived its most dangerous test. Only later did Eisenhower learn how close it had come to disaster. Casualties on Omaha alone numbered in the thousands. Entire companies had been shattered. The margin between success and catastrophe had been measured in minutes and individual acts of courage. That night, Eisenhower finally allowed himself to breathe. The note he had written, the one accepting full responsibility for failure, was never used. It remained folded in his pocket, unseen by the public for years. When it was eventually discovered, historians would point to it as evidence of Eisenhower's humility. But humility was not what saved D-Day. What saved it was a decision made under uncertainty, with incomplete information and no guarantee of success. Eisenhower never claimed brilliance for that decision. In later years, he would describe it simply as necessary. The weight of it, however, never fully left him. He understood that victory often depends less on perfect planning than on the willingness to accept irreversible consequences. D-Day became a symbol of Allied unity and resolve. It marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Eisenhower would go on to become a national hero and later President of the United States. But the fear he carried before D-Day never truly disappeared, because he knew something history often forgets, that the men remembered as great commanders are often those who stood closest to catastrophe, looked into it, and chose to move forward anyway. The beaches of Normandy are remembered as a triumph. For Eisenhower, they were a reminder of how fragile victory truly is, and how thin the line can be between command and responsibility for everything that follows. History only survives if someone carries it forward. If this documentary gave you something to think about, a moment, a detail, a perspective, consider subscribing. It tells the algorithm this story matters, and it tells us to keep making more.